episode of Pseud Central Podcast. I'm your host, Teapot, and today I got with me, four regulars, including myself, and two guests, AndGeo and Jericho. So you guys can introduce yourselves now.
All right, let Geo go first.
All right, so I'm Geo, right? And there's not much to talk about myself. I used to be a philosophy student. Now I study art history and politics. So that's who I am, I guess.
All right.
Thank you. Very cool introduction.
I'm Jericho. I am a backwater criminal, and I basically study philosophy in my spare time. I'm the Jordan Peterson of anarchy, if you will.
Like he's some sort of unholy union between Ted Kaczynski and Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah, No. I have the maps of meanings, except it's the maps to the government office.
That's great.
Oh boy! Truly, we've got high quality member with us today.
Definitely, we got with us Maestro, and we got with us HK and Brigadeiro. He'll come along a little bit later. And we got me, Teapot. And I don't think we need any more introduction to that. Just keep in mind, we're not kidding when we're fucking joking. All right, let's get this shit started. So Maestro, do you want to introduce what's been on your mind lately, man?
Of course. Well, in celebration of the end of the legendary No Not November, of course, the theme for this episode would start with the refined art of pornography and its meaning today in the culture industry. We're gonna connect a bit with the previous episode, so if you want to destroy your ears and also to hear more about on the subject, the first episode is also uploaded on our SoundCloud, on our YouTube too, so you can go and watch it there. But we will expand on the aspect of culture industry, and I think pornography in honor of Destroy Your Dick December is an excellent entrance, so to speak, to this subject. We will talk not as much about the moral aspects, because I think you've heard enough about the moral implications and so on, but we're going to talk about the structure, the action, the becoming. A Hegelian porno in the making will be here, basically.
Who are we inviting?
Basically, this is a chance for all of you to blow your collective balls out, you know.
Well, hopefully
I should have smoked more crack.
The nuclear model.
Yes.
I think it would be very good if we could get Sasha Grey and Slavoj Žižek and some kind of a little skit here sometime.
It's going to be a collab in the future.
What, on the same bed, you mean?
Oh yeah, of course.
The thing is with Zizek's mumbling, if they were to do any sort of oral scene, he'd basically be a vibrator. I don't know if she could handle that.
All right, I think that's enough vulgar. So, Maestro, do you have any favorites that you want to dissect into, open up?
I mean, the favorites I would say is, as with everything in capitalism, the schizophrenic aspect of every porn scene you see, the disconnect between the act, the performative act, and the filming itself. It's a trifecta. It's even beyond, the classical dialectics for me, apart from the she's acting during an action, so to speak. Two actions separated. There are three actions, even more actions, the consume of the actions. I'm going here on rambling because, we can talk a lot about it, but I think we should discuss the schizophrenic aspect of this kind of art form. Let's put it as in big quotes, so to speak.
Yes, art indeed.
I just want to honestly, I've been thinking about this lately as an art student and somebody makes music. There's nothing more I hate and like the fascist like anti-abstract art, not because of the stupid reason, that it isn't real art, this is a degeneracy. No, my case is that there is no such thing as art. Okay, ask any like fucking academic esthetician, well, maybe not those people, they're a bit crazy, but any art student that became like a teacher and like specialized in aesthetics, they'll tell you there's no such thing as like art that you can just write down on a piece of paper. It's a very subjective experience. But I want to go even beyond that. I just want to say that it's just all aesthetics, right? Maybe we can dive a bit deeper into that later. But like when it comes to pornography, it's just a part of aesthetics. It's not art in that sense. It's not supposed to be anything like, how should I put it? Beautiful. It can be, a sexual experience can be beautiful, but like I don't like this separation of porn art and like some like toilet or a banana. Someone fucking put a banana with duct tape on a wall and sold it for $120,000. I'm like, fine, do it. Do whatever the fuck you want to do. I'm not gonna call it art. Okay. The question though I have for you, Maestro, is when you say the schizophrenic aspect of like pornography, how does it differ from the schizophrenic nature of capitalism? Is there a distinction there? What do you mean by schizophrenia?
I mean, here we enter this kind of aspect of the identity of what pornography wants to represent, like this kind of, it wants to represent a moment which, to get its most efficient, the best moment, in sex or love making, depends. It's the intimacy, and it transforms this intimacy into this kind of mass-produced, like the action which we see on the camera. It's in contrast with the intention of with the other action, the intention, which this product is. Which is to be a product, to be sold, to be profitable, and so on and so forth. So it becomes this kind of, again, this kind of relationship between various aspects rather than a single one. It becomes this kind of very perverse dance orgy, even so to speak, of various aspects which don't make sense to be in the same room, aren't there to be together. They're completely confused. They're completely separated, yet united by one stupid thread, so to speak. And it's a very complex thing. It's a very complex thing which is connected to the action, to the motion of that. So it's all about the action. I think we should focus in regards to studying the action first of all.
You mean as in like a process, or
the process exactly as the
like
news was presented, a process rather than the result,
Yeah. Did you want to add anything, HK?
Yes. Well, to go back to what Maestro said on this sort of disconnect it had with with pornography, and yes, there is this desire, to transcribe intimacy, this sort of physical intensity, into something that could be, and you can, and there is a lot of and there's a lot of sort of disconnect between the situation of film production as well as the intimacy aspect, where it's almost when we're watching pornography, when they're engineered, to put it, in a vulgar term, perhaps, the cinematographers of pornography will have to engineer the situation of sex so that it's no longer intimate in order to be able to be maximally efficient in being transposed onto a medium, film in this case, So there is a disconnect between the act of cinematography and the act of the actual performance in and of itself, and it sometimes appear very glaring, especially when let's put it this way, some of the more acrobatics of modern pornography.
Yes. So would you say So you're really saying, because Jericho made this kind of illustration. I saw this live actually. He even made a little noise. It's pretty funny. But he was describing how the main subject of pornography is obviously the woman, right? But are you more referring to how the intimacy between the two subjects, like the man and the woman, or the two of them, how because of the camera, right? It's directed towards the woman, and you want eye contact with that woman. If it's not like a point of like POV scene or whatever, they'll look straight into the camera and not into the male. Is that what you're referring to?
I mean, sure, not just that, but also as this may sound old-fashioned, but during a sexual event, there should be a sort of a physical contact, a sort of a physical, intimacy and physical intertwining that you would find if you look for it. That is startlingly lacking in pornography, and that is because those sort of physical intimacy and physical entwining would, in a lot of ways, impede the capturing of such acts.
What would you say to that, like Jericho, in regards to the disconnect?
I actually think you're wrong a bit, Maestro, on that first part. I think that it's actually less that porn is disconnected as it's completely overwritten. In the Guy Debordaian sense, or however you say that guy's name, the object is supplanted by the image. And so I think what's actually happened in the modern day is that pornography and the idea of like the television surrogate person has so encapsulated like what it means to be an ascended figure that the commodity value of the female as a sex object has now become like a sex pedestal. You'll notice that like there's a lot of point of view. The female is always in focus, and I think when you observe that for long enough, that's where the female ends up, and it starts becoming infused with the concept of love, where the way that people perceive relationships, love, and all that, it is almost like backwards romantic, where the male is no longer like the leader. Male is a state of default, and then seeking, coming after the female, the chase, the hunt. The object in focus is always the female. The female is ascended, and the male is just baseline. And I think and then so as the image gets supplanted again the second run around, I think now like what it defines, what the way that you define the feminine in pornography is through consumption, and by consuming the media, you are partaking in a surrogate consumption of beauty that very shortly, almost like heroin, kind of fulfills the masculine social urge to be seen as like powerful by putting yourself beside the desired.
Wait, are you going into the direction of like Jordan Peterson when it comes to and I mean this doesn't have to be a bad thing, but like when he goes off into it in Maps of Meaning, with the male characteristic being order, right? And then you have the chaos dragon, right, that destroys everything in its path with a flame.
It's not quite. It's more actually feminist than that, which is a little weird. Women or feminists specifically have complained about women being commodified for a very long time. Like the image of the female is a status symbol. And so I think pornography is the sale of the status symbol of consuming the female. It's like it's almost like a projection of a projection.
Yeah.
it's a bit hard to get into because I'd have to go on and on and on about the same subject. So I feel like I'll piece it together.
Oh, we'll
as
go into
people
it
continue
later
to
on.
respond.
It's a
yeah. I don't want
broad
to take up
topic.
too much time, but basically what I'm getting to is that because people have been so isolated from something akin to a power process to where like the image of power is so distant from them that like the only way to consume it is through a surrogate image. And I think pornography is that consumer image, and the image is female. And I think the male is more so a blank self-insert that the person goes into. And that's why the fetishism of the female comes, is because the original object that they were attempting to appeal to has been supplanted. And kind of like when you put two mirrors together, the image gets a little greener. I think that's what you're seeing in modern pornography, is it's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy that gets a little less like the original each time.
Yeah, it becomes
And it's
hyper-real.
Well, or perhaps because the original never truly exists. But go on.
Well, the original exists in the mind of what humanity wanted to create.
Like an archetype,
Oh,
right? Or
Yeah, no, I mean,
okay.
the feminine, the beautiful, the graceful, the hunted, the prey, all these things are the feminine ideal. It's not woman, it's feminine ideal. But the longer you put that image up there, the more people try and grasp for it, either to be it or to be beside it. And it's gonna take you on a wild ride.
Yeah, we're gonna go on a wild ride on this one. Do you want to say something about that, Brit?
Who is the one to be ridden?
Yes, actually,
Definitely
I do.
me, please.
Ooh, wow. It's very, very sexualized. I suppose that
I'm
underlies the
tired
general
of-
theme.
Whoa.
Yes, but what I wanted to contribute at least is because Maestro mentioned the possibility of a Hegelian porno, and I was just looking back through some of my notes on his lectures on the aesthetics, or introductory lectures on aesthetics, and specifically the fine art category, because I think it's very important to underline what the tone of the conversation is and how some people mean some things in certain senses. I find it very interesting that Jericho actually put it in a direction where I could physically present what I have to offer without it being too terribly off course. Like Jericho
welcome.
specifically, where he was talking about the existence of mirrors and the simulacrization of the simulacrization. It's very important to look at how Hegel not only talks about how aesthetics is defined, but how specifically the beauty is utilized, and how I wouldn't say it's terribly difficult nowadays to imagine that most people would consider pornography to be a form of art, and as much as I personally detest treating it this way, the traditional methods for analyzing art, and also how we consider art nowadays, it's impossible not to consider it an art. So, for instance, when Hegel talks about how we come to understand the ideal of the human body, there is always a projection of the human organism. There is always a subject there, but within the spiritual interests which were trying to be presented within the form of either creating statues or creating fine arts, so the mediums of painting and poetry and music and so forth, he says that there is an attempt to inherently interject that with a spiritual tendency which made it seem not only more idealized but more and more realistic. So the difference, if you will, between modern art and what Maestro said that fascists like, or the traditional forms of romantic art, Baroque art, the high and fine arts as they're generally called nowadays, is that the high and fine arts, they belied a general unified and collective understanding of how the art was. So if you look at a painting by someone like William Adolphe, what's his last name? William Adolphe Thoreburg, who is a French artist, and you see his paintings of the Virgin Mary and all the themes that are convoked there, it's much more spiritual because by nature it is spiritual, but also moreover, the paintings and the themes and the way that skin and so forth is presented is inherently spiritualized. Like Hegel specifically notes that the skin in art does not look like human skin whatsoever. It looks almost divine by nature. It's usually either pale, very radiant, very vibrant, and the usage of colors are by nature not natural, which is what Jericho was belying, of it seeming greener the more and more you project it within a mirror. So I would say
I
at
would
least
suggest to look up Canova for that.
yes.
The sculpture he makes, his skin is legendary, for example,
Yes.
in the sculpture game.
Hold on. Let me finish
All
my
right,
point.
go ahead.
So at least in the projection, as Jericho was mentioning of archetypes, the archetypes are already supposed to be unrealistic. So when it comes to, with regards to pornography in this particular instance, the way that angles are used, the way that skin is used, that situations are treated, and that by and large the story is not supposed to be realistic, it's because, unlike art, pornography tries to utilize a real world and a real situation where it's very, very hard to romanticize it. That's why a lot of times you'll have, severe size contrast. You'll have, severe differences of lighting. You'll have a completely unrealistic situation because it tries to capture that same spiritual essence which art contained within the past, where it had these archetypes or these themes imbued within them in a much easier way to portray it. With the despiritualization, as some people would call it, of modernity, it's very hard to capture those themes, those same general ideas, without making it completely unrealistic. And that's why most people treat pornography as objectification, because frankly, in order to make it like art, or to make it, as accessible and as ideal and romanticized as it, you have to objectify people to a certain degree. Otherwise, if you just watched, porn which was realistic, it would be very, very disheartening, very, very unappealing, and it wouldn't have the same erotic projection as, many psychologists, and even Zizek has noted that porn inherently underlies.
I have a question for you, Brig. It's a bit back further. That's why I tried to get you earlier. You mentioned that you don't like comparing art to porn. Do you think there's some inherent idealization of the concept of art itself? Because I think there's such a thing as mockering art. Like if you've ever seen that cat painting on 4chan JP, it's the Silly Cat by Fernando Botero. It's called Still Life with Green Soup. If anyone wants to look it up, it's literally a fat cat that is meant to mock still life paintings, because it's a regular still life painting, but it has a really silly looking cat just in the middle of it. Does art specifically have to have an ideal or a higher essence to it? Or do you think art can just be mundane? It's just something humans do?
I would say to a certain degree, you have to have both. I mean, people like to very, very highly treat the fine arts, especially oil paintings. That seems to be the medium that is most used today to treat fine art. If somebody is, quote unquote, cultured on art, especially online, they'll have a romantic painting, they'll have a Baroque painting, they'll have some form of painting which conveys either a historical or very, very significant situation therein. I would say even in the time of, romantic and Baroque art, there was always mundane themes. If you look up the painting of Athens in 1830, before the Greek independence war, before Athens became a large city, it's a very mundane painting. You have the Acropolis in the background, and then you have sheep herders in the forefront or in the foreground, just herding their sheep. So by nature, art has always dealt with mundane themes. It just has different mediums throughout history. I would say specifically that you have to have at least some form of what you would consider to be an ideal in order to properly paint a painting, at least in this specific instance. So whether it be symmetry, lighting, distance, depth, so forth. And that seems to be a theme that art is actually kind of returning to now, that the horizon or the idea which it's aimed at is not necessarily within the projection thereof, but within the statement which is trying to be made. So, not Gallo, AngryTeapot, he brought up the instance of the banana being duct taped to a wall. It's not meant to be, of the same degree of reflection as, like an Adolphe painting would be, where, he's trying to portray, the Blessed Mother crying, after the crucifixion of Christ. They're completely different themes being portrayed there, but especially nowadays, there seems to be a de-elitization of how art is now. So you could look at people like Norman Rockwell, for instance, where he tried to use oil painting and so forth to portray very mundane themes. So I would say that there's an ideal which is within art to this day, but it's not of the same degree or depth or even understanding or expectations as within previous eras.
Oh, yeah.
Guess what? We have a history art student here, so...
You can go into that. I just want to recognize the hilarity of the image that Jericho talked about. It's just so funny. It looks like a little bub And funny enough, because of some serendipity, he's literally standing over a banana. Maybe that's just God laughing with us here. But by the way, rest in peace, little Bub. That cat was quite something. He looks like it too.
F.
You know it's Pseud Central when the punchlines are 10 minutes apart.
Yes.
Exactly. It's already our characteristic.
AndGeo, you had a point, right?
Yeah. So I'm first of all, I'm glad that Brig kind of brought this this conversation back to pornography as art, and I think Kandinsky makes a point about, like, in his book about concerning the spiritual in art.
By whom?
By Kandinsky,
Kandinsky.
the Russian artist.
I thought you said Kaczynski. I'm going crazy.
Ted Kaczynski, the famed mathematician and also the famed art critic.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Right, where he kind of goes into that about how different eras may empathize with other times by kind of like having similar feelings, so to speak, which lead to similar aesthetics. And I think this is one of those cases where maybe we see that a little bit, but how it's like, how the aesthetics of it, right? How the forms, you would say, are still radically different, right? Like a porno and a painting that is like esteemed in the fine art world, right? Like they may look very different, but they may have still some similar principles. But the point I wanted to actually bring up about art and reading porn as art is that, like, I think it is particularly interesting now to analyze, to do a kind of literary analysis of pornography as a genre, which is, it's a little bit structuralist, a little bit cringe maybe, but I think you can discover some interesting developments and tensions.
Don't go all to zero on me,
We're all
please.
about tensions here. You can go on all you
Okay,
want.
bro. Okay, listen. If I was to go out to there, I would have killed my roommate already, bro.
You sleep with
talking
your
about
roommate?
I can
Sexual
agree with
tension?
you on that.
Yeah. I don't want to like take over the conversation too much. I think if any of you guys want to talk a little bit before I talk about the
You
like.
can dom us, don't worry. We'll do
Okay,
that.
okay, epic, bro.
Yes.
This is
Yeah, I
a
know.
sexually themed conversation. Make it as sexual as possible.
Especially
Actually,
Hit us
Jericho.
with that structuralism, brother. Hit us with that structuralism.
If no one else wants to go first, I can throw something out there.
I think we'll be just fine. You can go on, AndGeo.
All right, thank you. I mean, especially with Jericho being here, being a little bottom, right? Like he needs to be down sometimes.
Oh my god. In front of an audience of a whole 10 people as well.
Yeah, dude.
Based.
Half of them are already in this call. Hell yeah. What do you want to
Hell
say?
yeah. So the like porn as a genre, right? Like obviously is gonna have some types. I don't want to go as far as call them archetypes, right? But like you have the virgin whore, you have the femme fatale, right?
Yeah.
Represented. And I'm sure there are like more genre specific things that I haven't thought about it.
Tomboy.
Johnny
Because, come on,
Sins.
the archetypal session, right?
You know, it's like the Da Vinci Man of porn.
The suicidal, depressive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
good point.
the self-insert in hentai as well, right? But
Shit, there's actually a big one, which is the cam whore, which is like almost like the reality television of pornography.
Yes.
dude, it's epic, bro. Check out Alice Biscuit.
No, but I'm saying, I was just going to say quickly, the aesthetic is that they're more real, like you're interacting with them, but they're the exact same as the other pornographies.
Yes.
Wait, what do you call a person like Belle Delphine? I mean, they're basically just scamming people and like
E-girl.
Oh, a con artist.
E-girl.
all into the fucking
E-girl.
commodification. Is that an e-girl? Okay,
Yes, that is literally an eager.
that's base.
No
Yeah,
differentiation.
rent a girlfriend.
Rent a girlfriend. Based.
Commodified.
I mean, we are in the Asian market would like to refer to them as the gacha pool.
Wait, don't you have in Japan like cutie girls that actually on stream eat shit? You know, like not literal shit, but eat food.
No. I mean,
I saw a girl eat a mechanical keyboard today on Twitter. I don't know if that counts.
Oh yeah.
You're into some really interesting versions.
Wait.
of
Was she eating it or was she deep throating it?
No, she
There's a
was
big
eating
difference.
it like a chocolate bar.
Wait, like hold on, like key by
Powerful.
key, or like just biting the board in half?
Fighting it off, you know. It's
Not in half.
Jesus.
Just doing the normal thing of eating the keyboard, you know.
Yes.
There's no more differentiation there. It's just eating the keyboard.
Tasty vor.
The absolute concept of the real.
what were you saying?
No.
Right. To go back to my point is that like there perhaps you guys are like familiar with the type of the dragon lady, right? It's particularly important in American culture, right? Where it's like this woman that it's femme fatale meets Yellow Pearl, I think the TV tropes page for it puts it, right? But it's like this exotic Asian woman that is dangerous and seductive and alluring and whatnot. And I think this is gonna
you got against Asians, Jericho.
bro.
Oh, it was an attractive.
This is a racist podcast now, dude. We're gonna get demonetized.
Of course, this is the kind of shit.
And I think
of course it is.
There is a parallel to this is gonna sound cringe, but in older communities where it's about quote unquote like she males and futanari and that stuff, and I think because you very often like with futanari, you obviously immediately have like the exotic factor, right? It's Japanese and whatnot. It's
you think that's the exotic?
Yeah, totally. For Western audiences,
It's
of course.
exclusively Japanese. Exclusively.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't call it that if it wasn't. But with like kind of she males, right? It's kind of an outdated term, right? Like, but you often had the kind of like darker skinned women and like. Think about Thailand, right? But
Brazilians.
Right. And I think there is like these 3 points, right, where you have like an exotic woman. You have the aspect of the like feminine, like kind of like what Jericho said, right? The woman that is to be consumed, to like that is alluring. And then you have the 3rd point, which is kind of a like masculine aspect in the femme fatale, right? Where she's
the feminine penis.
kind of right.
I think that's true.
And yeah, Jericho, you want to say something?
Yeah, Gio. I really think what it is I think it's the allure of a dominant woman. But dominance is so attached to masculinity that there has to be some physical way for a woman to be dominant, and I think that's where Fuda came from.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
do. I think it's an
I
expression of
at all.
I think it's an expression of a desire that didn't quite have an image yet.
Is this where CBT came from?
It did have an image though, because was it Freud that said that certain there is a certain hysteria within women that is literally just penis envy, that's
yes, that's his
I thought you were gonna bring up Mommy Tom and this was about to go hard downhill.
No, this is about girls smoking cigarettes as a point of power. Okay, like the elongated. Yeah, you get the point.
Yes.
Reject modernity, embrace tradition, aka tomboys.
Yes. Yes. Sorry.
And to develop this a little bit, right? Like, there has been an uptick, I think, of like this type of, kind of gender bending, gender breaking porn. Like, it has at least been more relevant to mainstream discussion. And what's interesting about that is when you replace the kind of relatively stable triangle of the she-male, right, or the futa, which is both masculine and feminine. You go like into the modern trans version of this, which is maybe a little bit more legitimate, where you have like actually a becoming of feminine.
Cult is unrealistic, it kind of sounds unrealistic. I think HK has something about unrealism, so to speak, about this kind of fantasy world.
Oh yeah.
I mean, sure. Because like I once again, I'm sorry to go into a little bit of vulgar analysis here. So basically, I think what we still need to remember, there is very much a kind of a commercial element to pornography, and I think that very much affects the unreal component of it. I think what we have is, because don't forget the whole, pornography has this intrinsic understanding that despite it being such an very, we can, wax lyrical, but it is a very impactful, medium. There's a lot of impact. There's a lot of visceral. Yes, exactly. There's a lot of meat and bodily fluids. But it still must truncate itself and format itself so it could fit neatly into the sort of digitized micro slices that were used to receive information. And that's why I think there's a lot of unreal, this sort of, because what pornography is trying to do is it wishes to, I believe it is what, I believe George Bataille mentions this, and that is it tries to present itself as a limit experience, which is an experience that isn't that sort of surpasses the real. This image of viscerality, this image, but at the same time, it's a truncated viscerality, it's a viscerality that could very easily be reformatted, cut down, stripped, and then repackaged and delivered to you. And that's why there is this. That's why I think a lot of pornography leans into the unreal.
Speaking of the unreal, can we cut quickly into like the concept of the ahegao being used by
getting fucked.
So the ahegao was like so hentai in anime has always been like an exaggeration of the human emotion. It's always been like extreme.
It's a limit experience. Yes.
Yeah, so it's very loud emotionally, and the ahegao is like a perfect example of that. But now you have cam whores and porn actresses who are copying the ahegao from the image and supplanting it back into reality to be copied again. I think of like artists, I suppose, if you wanted to call it, such as like
prostitutes.
If you're interested tonight in a good one, purple bitch might be a good Google search for you. Just make sure to set the private. But this girl like constantly ahegaos, like it's a fake ahegao obviously, but she constantly does it for these little snippet clips meant to capture an exaggerated moment, just like you were describing. So what I'm trying to add to you, yeah, at a price, of course, to sustain the dildo collection bills. Obviously, it's non-profit.
It's more like I think she buys. I think top brand lube does cost quite a bit, so I can't really blame her.
It's a very hard to sustain business, but. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that to like the unreal has now become the real. And I'm interested to see like what they're gonna have to come up with to supplant that, because it's already removed from reality.
I mean, sure. So, like, I think the whole idea is, pornography will keep chasing after a limit experience. There's almost a kind of a sublimity in physicality,
That can work. Gio, about the limit experience, can you expand on the subject?
Yeah, so this is actually a kind of recent thought, so it's very half-baked. But the thing that
Well, we're all half-baked
I'm
or
really
half-cocked,
I
shall we
mean,
say.
same.
We're
Oh,
doing
man.
a podcast which will make us mortal enemies of the Radfam community in a sec.
I mean, I could make some points about this too, because
Just the
I think we're
reference?
being a little bit uncritical. But anyway, what I wanted to say about limit experience is that there is this paper that I was reading for the podcast, which focuses on like a schizo-analysis of cinema. And I thought, well, that's kind of similar to pornography. And the thing the guy mentions, I'm not going to try pronouncing his name. It's not that hard, but it's like, I'm not going to do it. Is that in the process of like schizo-analysis of cinema, you should focus on the way the other kind of like organizes. So he uses the Birds by, I forget his name. The you guys know the movie Birds, right?
Can you synopsize it?
Yeah,
The
synopsis.
one where they
Yeah.
fight CGI birds, fake CGI birds with coat hangers.
Wait,
Yes,
what?
more or less. Well,
Wait, what?
Birdemic
No, it's not.
1 and 2. Great movies.
no,
Great.
Oh,
That's-
fuck! I confused it. Fuck.
I mean the Birds by Hitchcock, where it's like a bunch of ravens, and yeah. So where there's like this kind of strange swarm-like behavior to those birds, right? And like this is a very key like thing for this. I don't want to say creatures, right? Because sure, there's multiple birds, but they act as a swarm. So what I noticed about like porn is that, okay, so you have like, how do people in porn organize? And it's surprisingly like, sure, there is kind of like the guy needs to get off, right? Like no one cares, so to speak, if the woman really orgasms or if she orgasms at all. Like it's just you need to get those cummies on that face
The money
ASAP.
shot, buddy. The
Exactly.
That's
And
one way to
Better
put
than a
it.
money shift.
but still, right? There is a relatively utilitarian approach to it, right? Like there's always going to be, when you have more than two people, right? Kind of this passing around, like everyone needs to get fucked, right? So, and I think it's too utilitarian, too collectivist of a type of approach to really go for a limit experience or even like get close to it, because a limit experience would be just suck the guy dry, like for real.
Redistribute the means of reproduction.
So what you're saying is there should be a trial by combat before they gain access to the seed.
No, I'm
is
saying
that what you're saying?
If you want to look for a limit experience in porn, you're not going to do that in like Western, even worse, like Eastern porn is even worse than that. But like you're not going to look for it in real.
Have you ever seen
porn.
snuff
You're
films, brother?
Well, can
I
you
have,
define
I
a
have.
limit experience in this context?
Well, a limited experience is in that which it pushes the boundaries of which you know. So like there well,
Think
is
mind
a-
break,
is a-
bro.
Oh, so it's like a limit
kind of.
break.
Yes, is a limit of what is beyond quite what we can experience. For example, stuff like a shit ton of pornography involves you fucking your step sibling.
Well, I can get that for you, but it's not legal.
Well, but that's the point, isn't it? It is a limited experience. It's which an experience that is beyond most of us. It's this shocking impact of it which dominates our attention for a short while, in which
but that's
then
not
it let us
sustainable.
go. Yeah, but that's the point.
Yeah.
Limited experiences are never meant to be sustainable, and pornography understands it, which is why it never tries to sustain this. It never tries to sustain it. It grabs our attention and then let it go again.
But
This is how it entreats.
But in the long term, I mean, pornography is constantly available. So instead of coming down, wouldn't it be like infinitely seeking the next limit? And I think that's how the iceberg meme happens.
Yes.
I mean, yes. Yeah, sure, it does.
I mean, we went from plumber porn and cable guys porn to
Mario
incest porn. I mean,
Bowser, put on the crown.
No,
or
please,
the idea of barely legal, constantly scratching just the limit of what can be.
I mean, one example of that would be like Japan, right? They still kind of live on in this confusion hell, but somehow their entire culture industry, I want to go into that later on as well in general, but it's very much based on this like extreme, I would almost call it like a surplus enjoyment, right? But I don't think I've fully grasped that concept, but it definitely pushes the limits to all the extents when it comes to music, game shows, and definitely like pornography with weird categories like bukkake and fucking like oversized, like regular women, but with oversized feminine body parts, like breasts or whatever.
I mean, sure.
Or like rape porn is apparently like big in Japan. Like it's very strange.
It's becoming big even here in some ways. And like, for example,
it has always been. Let's be real.
Pornhub, for example, the amateur couples, the Pornhub verified, the scene which is growing very much. It features a lot of very, how to say, forceful aspects. And not surprisingly, most of those performers are from Russia, but man, who the fuck is surprised about that? Eastern Europe buddies. I mean, I know that. I'm one.
That's actually, like, what's interesting about that is, the clear ties you can find about the libidinal economy and the political economy in porn, right? You talked about, what's it called? The plumber porn, right? Like the old stories of pornography, and that was kind of codified by law, right? It's I think the reason they did that was because they had to have a story in order for it to be like publishable in the first place. And similarly with amateur couples, right? Like this is like the hyper competitive cyber economy where like you need to be visible, right? Absolutely need to. So you end up doing not just like, it's not rape porn that is becoming popular. Rape porn, like if you look at porn in general, you're often gonna be having scenes that, like, if you think about it, they're rape, right? Like, totally the girl was into it afterwards, right, bro? That's not rape, dude. She came, bro. Like, I don't know what you mean, but it's conscious rape porn, right? Like it's porn that makes the point of telling you, like, okay, this is rape. Like the woman definitely doesn't want it.
Sure. It's not just this. Once again, with this idea of the barely legal, shit like that. It tries to chase after almost this high of this image of illegalism, this image of put it in certain words, defiance of authority, but in a way that is packaged and consumable.
Jericho has made before we had talks, like before the podcast, of course, to warm out in general. He made really good points in regards to consent, to this kind of aspect, especially to the rape aspect. And it presents a very interesting point, which one should take account of, I think.
If I don't get it, I'm sorry. I'm a schizo, and I forget everything that I say within like 30 minutes. But
you have
if you want to rephrase my own point, if I don't get it, but what I wanted to say was, I think that like the concept of rape in pornography has sort of been made safe in the image, because the consent is predetermined as part of the storyline. So like the whole concept of consent itself is manufactured from the beginning. You know, the whole idea of the porn where a rape is occurring is it's sort of it's less rape and more a chase. You know, the resistance is just a part of the act to the consent that was there from the beginning, because it's entirely linear. And so there's never an instance of not until you get to like that deep iceberg shit where the rape ever ends on a low note. There's always that almost movie-like happy ending where the woman, finally does give the consent. There's never that dark moment of just regret at the very end.
I mean,
but that might not have been what I was talking about before.
Well,
I mean,
there is like what I'm thinking is
yes.
like with any work, like if you really want to be autistic about it when it comes to like Marx's perspective, like you can have surplus value in that you produce something and you don't get what you're producing really, but you could also view it as like there is a agreed upon consent, but really what you are consenting to is not the act itself, but it is the rather things you would not consent to in normal sexual relationships. You're doing something here that is taboo, and you will feel uncomfortable a lot of the times, and
Money
they have
talks.
to fake that. But yeah, it's not. You could really go into it like with prostitution and men, because I think that was the point you made earlier.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So my ramble earlier was more about how men are included into the whole concept of consent. Because the ideal of the chase, the man as the actor and the woman as like the static mirror that bestows worth upon the male once he, enraptures himself beside it, is instilled from birth through media. And women have sort of shifted away from being the object, but the remnants of that game of how the sexes interact remain. So men are still in this chase, but they're interacting with an actor, not a static, not a static dance, not a waltz. It's more improvised. It's more unpredictable. And I think that actually hurts men, because men never consented to being the provider, to being the chaser. And the real damage from the ideal is that men now have to seek a safe surrogacy that consumes their labor value in the form of money by paying a woman to be the ideal that they were basically gaslit into seeking. Because if they attempt to do it in real life, it can occur in a rape. Because the idealization that has been like hammered into their head doesn't exist anymore, and probably never existed in the first place.
Exactly.
And I don't think the biggest problem is that sex workers don't like to think of themselves as unethical. Nobody likes to think of what they're doing as unethical. But I question how something like consuming men who have basically never been absolved of this like responsibility, where their worth, their masculinity is predicated on the female commodity, to then sell it to them in its surrogate form is sort of exploitation, in my opinion. And I think that's what I was talking about earlier. But if you want to cover some points I might have forgot, I mean, I'm crazy.
No,
I
that
can't help
explains it a lot better, actually, than the first time you said it.
Yeah, it
Sure.
explains it a lot better. God of War, anything to add?
HK, do you have anything?
No.
Okay.
It's break.
See, the interesting thing that I found about this conversation in general is that Jericho is talking about, I would say, the de-symbolization, if you will, of how rape is treated, especially with it becoming more and more prominent. It's less and less violent now, but also certain other forms have become more and more violent. Specifically how he was talking about it as being a chase. If you look at the people that are usually involved in the stories that are supposed to, condone or connotate or describe what rape is like, the man is almost always, in a better position than the woman is, at least situationally. You could think of, the woman being a maid, for instance, and the man being the rich homeowner, where, he's very good looking, and he's very masculine, very attractive, very charming, so that it's not really properly rape, because they have to preface it at the end by it being, there's actually some underlying consent which exists there, or, they enjoy it so much that they actually consent to it, in hindsight, which is, frankly, not only a misunderstanding of what rape is like, but it's very characteristic of an almost attempt to neutralize any sort of significance of it. And, some people may come to the understanding or the conclusion that if it is always like this, then it is acceptable. I know there's plenty of women that I know personally, but it's a more recent social phenomenon as well, where they idealize rape, or, they are completely fine with rape under certain conditions, that man I was
under
talking
the
about.
ideal conditions.
Yeah, the ideal conditions, which is never what rape is fundamentally like. It's always somebody that you don't like, or somebody you don't want to be around, and you give off, very mixed signals to them, and then guess what? They take advantage of whatever situation you were within. It's not, the rich 6'6" doctor, with bulging muscles and a huge dick, with a nice chin and everything that's going to rape you. It'll be somebody that you don't like to a certain degree, or it'll just be, some random person that you've never seen in your entire life. And it will scar you because it is not those ideal conditions where you have become neutralized to it for a certain time period, and then you're quickly awakened and you're like, wow, it's actually like this. It's not how I imagined it or how it's projected whatsoever.
Yeah, I know it's kind of like a washed up take, but I do think that the way that people imagine things through the lens of the image is very quickly shattered. Like, especially the archetype of like the internet tough guy, and the difference between like a real fight and once you get started, and like the way that people who actually fight carry themselves versus the people who think they could fight. I think it's the same concept as, women who think they would like rape and women who have experienced rape. A few of the pieces that are missing in the mirror that went green are awakened to those people.
Oh, yeah. I remember one of the conversations we had a couple of days ago. I don't specifically remember what it was about, but the idea I had was...
Was it about me being arrested?
Possibly. No, not in this context. That would be very bad. None of us are sex offenders here. I seriously hope.
I mean,
I'm clean there.
Do you have something you want to share with us, perhaps? Let me just get my little black book
We'll
out.
erase you from the pictures. Don't worry.
No, I was never
Stalin
there.
moment.
As Zizek would say, I'm from that other part of the Balkans where women are raped and they like it.
God.
Oh, and we just got full demonetized.
Don't worry
Maestro,
about it.
thank you for
Okay.
that.
As if we have an
Why
access account
why is
anymore.
there a giant Venus symbol burning outside in my yard?
Don't worry, Jericho. You're not the main subject of this
It's me.
psychoanalysis, okay? But the idea is basically, right, that you have a lack, especially within fetishization. And people who are, let's say, they're either like very narcissistic or they have a huge ego. It's usually to compensate for a lack of self-esteem, right? That's a very basic concept in psychology. But if you want to go deeper than that, then desire ultimately are based on things that you feel you lack in your life, right? So you can have an abundance mindset, for example. This is like one of those buzzwords that businessmen use, like synergy or whatever. But it comes from a deeper origin. And having like a scarcity mindset or feeling like you lack these things and you desire them because of that reason, that could result in a fetishism. So I have no idea really where this rape fetishism comes from, but in female subjects, it might be because of some trauma. I'm not sure. But the idea that is, and I have friends that is this now, obviously I will not expose them. That would be very embarrassing. but people admit these things on social media for some fucking reason. I mean, we're talking about pornography right now, so we're no better. But the people that admit to having rape fantasies.
What do you mean
Hey,
we're no better? We're
philosophers.
tons better.
They've been-
we're suits.
Yeah, we're
tons
suits. All
better.
right, we're suits, but we're not. Well, we're perverts too, but not that kind. So these people have experienced some kind of sexual abuse, and I'm not sure if they've actually been raped. They've said so, but a lot of people that have these fantasies have not actually had the experience, right? Like you said, Brig. But for some reason, and it's weird, the people that have these fantasies and eventually become like they have the experience of being raped, it's a lot more traumatic than what a, let's put it, normal person would react to it. Obviously, it's very uncomfortable, and it's horrifying. People like Zizek has even said that we should maybe give a death penalty to people that commit rape. And he would never give an excuse to someone that like says, well, they probably liked it anyways or whatever. Like, no, absolutely not. But it's kind of fascinating, though, that because of their desire that seems to be based in some kind of perhaps lack in self-esteem or whatever it is, makes it a lot more traumatic than if they did not have that fetishism. However, Jericho, like, before we move on, I think you said something that was quite controversial about this particular topic when it came to the fetishization and rape in particular. I don't know if you remembered anything from that conversation, but
if you want to jog my memory and like kind of paraphrase what I said, I might be able to like clarify on it.
We might return to it
Dimension
later.
moment.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily connected to this thing.
Oh, well, that's fine. You can bring it up later. I'm sorry that all of my hot takes basically take part of my subconscious.
Oh, that's a good rolling point. Very interesting. But Gio, present your salvo into this combo. Present your point.
Well,
No, you should. No, Maestro. What you should really say is prepare your load.
Okay,
we should not say this actually.
Prep the bowl.
Well, the perhaps more traumatizing thing is like I think the average rape victim is gonna get raped by someone they know, right? So
Yes.
while it's definitely not the 6'6", I don't know, Mongolian step god that rapes them, it is perhaps a person that they did like, right? And I think that's maybe like an even more traumatic thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, sure, having false expectations, it's like thrown into cold water afterwards, right? Like where you realize, shit, that's not how I imagined this. But with a person you know, and even one that you might like, perhaps even your spouse, right? It's not just horrible and unexpected. It's a break of trust, right? Like it's a kind of breakdown of the social.
Like,
and I also wanted to say, I think, I don't know, saying the opposite it's I don't know, a little bit incel talk maybe.
you presented a really solid point in regards to, like, actually speaking, the majority of sexual assault is committed by people that know the victim, that are close to the victim. Like the majority of them, like the great majority of them I'm speaking, is committed by people that well know the victim, for example. And it can take even place in a domestic setting and in all kinds of setting. So one should consider the wise. A good point Jericho also talked about, or it was Teapot. I don't quite understand. Don't remember. It was the aspect of the consent and how this consent is already pre-built. You know, this kind of idea is already pre-built and already pre-inserted, so to speak, in regards to rape, rape porn, for example.
There's a presumption of consent in a given situation. Yeah, Jericho made that point. things.
Yeah, like there is this kind of like the thing is that the issue when we analyze this kind of phenomena, or in general, pornography in general, we always focus on the result, on the final act, on the money shot, so to speak.
Sure.
We always focus on the. I'm being very tasteless here, but to create more the impact, to create more the like we focus more on the how the action, not the action, but the end of the action, not the process, not how
the climax is what you're looking for.
That's the issue. That when we we do this kind of analysis, we need to understand that there is a precedent. That's why most rapes are committed by people they know how to say. And Jericho, please, you can shoot me down.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you could expand on that point before, what do you think of the concept of like squirting being the visual medium of the female orgasm? It's sort of like a visualization of the climax. It's the money envy. Shot. It's penis envy. Everything's penis envy. Thank you, Freud. Why do we even have any other books?
Exactly.
Like the thing is that visualization is so key in such a visual, how to say, environment like pornography. It's key. But for example, in other medias, like for example, audio pornography, which exists, which it's very much more amateurish, it's much more, how to say, genuine, so to speak. And it has a very interesting element that there, for example, it's more about like the voice cues, it's a different way of expressing, but it's in the same way a very similar way of expressing. You need to know when the height of the process comes, so you have an indicator. That's the thing. Like there is this kind of need to put this kind of point, because you try to present something completely unrealistic, something completely outside, that you need a point which you can visualize, but this is an act that is connected to reality, so to speak. For example, like you need a grounding point. You need a point which you understand that during that act, which is so absurd, so wow, so impactful, you just look at it and think, this is the point where this is an actual act. It's not just fantasy. It's not just a dream. It's not just smoke, It's like the grounding. It's like when you just go down, basically.
Go down on who?
Go down from the dream.
Thank you. I'll be here all week.
You can give your act from the garbage cans in the back.
Hey, all right. I mean, that's something at least. Dude, have you heard that Tim Pool went to the streets, made music, and made mad loot? I'm gonna do that with comedy from the garbage bin.
Wait, are you telling me Tim Pool became so poor he became a busker? Like, what happened?
No, I think he
was a really good busker, actually.
About that. He talked about that in a tweet. I don't know if it's true. Whatever.
Okay.
It's Tim Pool. You can automatically assume that it's not.
All right. So I wanted to make a point about like the presumed consent of porn, I guess. The kind of scary thing is like that this is absolutely correct, right? When you watch a porno, like 99% of the time, you're just going to assume like, yeah, this is legit, more or less at least, right? Like maybe if you're into some weird stuff or like some revenge porn, then, you understand that this is not the case, but this is like kind of deviant territory. But the fact of the matter is like, unless it's child porn where it's kind of obvious, if a rape was to be uploaded on Pornhub, likely it would stay up, right? And people would not even notice. I mean, because
sorry, quick thing. Don't they already have like quite a bit of like underage people on there already? On that website.
I assume so, but it's like hard to statistically gauge, right? But like if a woman thing, has like. If there's a guy behind the camera with a gun, right, and it's like, you fucking wouldn't know. You would just jerk off. And but there is still like that assumption, the social contract that's like, yes, this is a commodity on a legit website. This like cannot be unjust.
I will say that like you can find some heavy stuff that is very obviously rape, and I, as an expert in this category, somehow I would actually.
We don't need to know your criminal background,
No,
please.
not like that.
We
But
don't
I'm
want
just
to get
saying
arrested.
it is somewhat easy to tell that the consent isn't there. I think the disconnect is in attempting to perform the media for real. Like I think it's that disconnect. It's the attempt of normal people to replicate the image in reality that causes the rapes. In my opinion.
Do you think that consent can be like taken gradually, right? Because, for example, if you have, I don't know, Romanian woman that got smuggled into a different country for prostitution, like there sort of is like some consent, kind of, but also there is definite
like manufactured
coercion.
Consent.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more like I mean, then again, what you have to ask is, okay, is a necessity of survival or a form of consent? Because like once again, once again, it's like the woman who's been threatened with a gun, is that really quote unquote consent?
Well,
to put it in a more dramatic, comparison.
Sure, but it is dramatic, right?
Well, I mean, the same thing with like having to eat is paying a porn actress the same as saying if you don't have sex, you'll starve.
You know what's funny? Like we're transitioning a little bit away from the topic now, but I think you already did so pretty well with
Thank God my
trafficking.
parole officer might be watching.
Yeah, there are certain channels on YouTube. We're all familiar. Yeah.
Wait, no. We're not all familiar. I don't have anything to do with this.
No. This is not pornography, okay? Well, I'm going to make a point here. All right. So,
wink.
On YouTube and any other degenerate platform on the intrawebs, that has video, which the deep web does not have. Stop watching creepypastas, you freaks. Like, it's what it is really about is obviously not some kind of, well, I don't know how these pornography websites function internally. They're probably creeps, all of them. They probably sexually abuse their own, how should I put it? Like
content
employees.
creators.
Yeah. But
content
creators. Hi, I'm a content creator at Pornhub. What the fuck does that mean? But on YouTube,
I mean,
there's a lot of trends. Let's put it that way, and they're neither family friendly or explicitly pornographic or whatever. It can be whatever. And one of these trends is mukbang, right? It's from West, like Eastern traditions. And the strange thing about mukbang...
Okay, whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
Oh, we Chinese have nothing to do with this, okay?
I didn't say Chinese, okay. But sure.
Yeah, but when you say Eastern, what you're saying is you're lumping us all together.
Yes,
we
I am
have
a
nothing
racist.
to do with
We've
that.
already established that earlier in the program, okay? I get your point.
Racism is against harmonious cooperation, minus 20 social credit points.
Oh no!
Well, it all evens out. Okay, it all evens out.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping banned pornography, anyways, and we're kind of criticizing it or something, I guess. But
we're contributing to the health of the population by disincentivizing.
Yes, exactly.
Asocial behavior. Get married.
Don't rate now, everyone. These are obvious things, right? We shouldn't need to tell you everything. But then again, on YouTube right now, you clearly have to state you are child friendly. And I think with some of the content here, specifically the cheese pizza part, this is not a family friendly program. In any case, there is a connection between a lack of consent and just the general culture industry, especially on YouTube now, because there's so much uncharted territory. One of these territories is mukbang. And what's fascinating is with the whole gun against your head scenario, you can't tell the difference, but some of them are ambiguous. So there is a Chinese channel because they've entered the market now, I suppose. And porn is illegal, but they really try to push beyond the limits. And I don't know, maybe some people are into the eating aspect of it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a sexual aspect to it too. The kind of foods they eat, they just
ASMR
shove it in their
most
faces.
Definitely,
that is true. ASMR is a big avenue. I use it for sleep personally, but a lot of people are into like the more. No, really, like it's weird. Some people don't understand it. Some people are into it for the sexual parts, but it also has this like very relaxing sensation. It's just autistic reactions to certain sounds. But again, that's part of the uncharted territory. We can't really explain the reasoning behind these desires.
How come so many ASMR girls have like nudie Patreons?
Exactly. And that's the thing. They've all kind of blended together, but that's not necessarily always the case.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, sure.
But
just as the workplace and leisure, deterritorializes and becoming less distinct, various form of, the stimulus of leisure, also deterritorializes. So companionship, sexual passion, sexual desire, libido, they all get tangled up in there.
There is no distinction, it arrives at this point of this kind of obsessive compulsive disorder that I think humanism as an idea has of trying to find the universal, and by finding this kind of center of the universe, this kind of pinpoint, this kind of we need to put everything to the origin of let's put it the origin. Everything has with numbers, everything can be interpreted with numbers, in a system. So a system, for example. So humanism has this obsession towards finding this central point, this kind of be it human nature, be it and it's always in conflict. It always shifts. It's fictitious. It doesn't exist. But humanism pretends that it exists and pushes towards it, and thus distinction between become blurred because everything wants to move towards the center and completely compress themselves, simplify, lose the complexity, lose the nuance, and it becomes this kind of a complete mess of confusion, a chaotic mess that it's in contrast with each other, with itself, but also it's connected to itself. So it's a very complex thing that one has to figure. I think the biggest, I think this is one of the biggest points we should focus on in regards today as thinkers, if we want to approach it, to deconstruct humanism, to approach, and I think how we moved from the culture industry, if we move towards this aspect, we can discover a bigger overarching big picture, so to speak.
Yeah, and like before we go like deeper into humanism, because that it is a big broad topic that like it's an itch that needs to be scratched, like really, but the regarding
our bi-weekly shitting on humanism.
Yes, exactly. Democracy, watch out! We're coming for you too.
Can we define humanism for the people that don't read?
We shall
not Jericho, but maybe some other people that might not read.
The God of War.
Yes, we shall do that. But with a gun to my head, or I'll explain this first. I don't know. I always feel like, when you're doing a podcast, you're talking to some big other. Not that we really apply any social norms here. We talk about whatever the fuck we want. But
we're rebels.
Yeah, we're based and red pilled and cack.
Come on. Don't do otherwise we'll end up with a 68 and be commodified like the 68 was.
Yeah.
Sigh.
But the commodified. But
fuck you all. Fuck you all.
But this particular mukbang channel from China, you can't find any social media connected to it. You don't even know the name of the person. I don't even know what the name of it is.
It's China. Do you really? It's a Chinese person posting on YouTube. Do you really think they want to have their social media be out there?
That's
social
true.
credit score.
That is one explanation for it, all right? But the thing is, people started noticing things of this girl. She did a bit more extreme version of it. It was like eating 5 kilos of food, a lot of exotic foods, like fucking.
Oh God, I've seen that.
Yeah, it's like octopuses and all these kinds of things, just shoving it in their mouths, like very vulgar almost. But that isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is that after a while, she had a lot of subscribers, I think over 1 million, and they started noticing she had like wounds on her face and her arm, and she seemed kind of down. They started suspecting that maybe she is not in control of this recording, right? And because there's no social media connected to it. They started thinking she was a victim of human trafficking. Now that is pretty significant considering it has over 1 million subscribers and it's on YouTube. But she also would speak in a code, like with the titles, and we're not even sure if like she is doing it as like an alternate reality game, like an ARG, or
some Nexpo shit.
Or and the person is like making the videos herself, but she has a manager, and the manager is like her trafficking manager or whatever. So like all these things, all these clues, we don't know yet. We can't track these people down with all the internet security or whatever. But I would definitely say there's a sexual aspect to it. I would definitely say that whatever accounts for rape, for slavery, this is not consensual, what's going on with these people.
Sure.
And we're just seeing it in front of us. Like, we can't do anything about it. And this is where I want to go like deeper into the humanism aspect, right? Because really what it means for me, right, it's a broader philosophical topic, but like we have pretty much with all of this kind of mixing together of all these genres, our agency to affect the market as human beings, especially on the internet, is next to zero.
Well,
right?
just vote
and that's
with your
a big
wallet,
problem.
bro.
Sorry, what?
Just vote with your wallet, bro. What are you talking about?
It's easy,
Vote with
bro.
your wallet.
Oh my god.
Just don't buy stuff. Just buy, I guess.
AndGeo, you had something to say.
Yeah, present your wallet.
Yeah, so you're talking about like this possibility of, okay, what if this woman is being trafficked or whatever. I think more interesting is the possibility of this not being the case, that this is like not an ARG, right? But say I am a corporation, right? It would be very interesting to know the limits of like, what does an audience notice in this type of content? Like, if I want to forge kind of reality, if I want to create a drama, or perhaps I'm like a very like I'm just a CEO or a member of a board that's like kind of a dick, right? And he thinks like, well, maybe we could traffic people, but we need to know like what people would notice, right? Like this type of content like probably has a monetary value in a sense, and I think that's an interesting avenue you can think about it, because it reminds me a lot of that one YouTuber story where it was just this woman vlogging and it was all manufactured.
Yeah, like,
don't remember her name though.
No. And I mean, like in China, they're always pushing the barriers. I think there's some very interesting things going on, like in South Korea and China. In China, it's more like
I can tell you guys straight away that stream. One of the big parts about streaming is this very pornographically dominated, because streaming, and ironically, is quite difficult to manage as of now.
Oh yeah. In what sense?
There's a lot of. I think there are certain platforms in which are used to stream. I think it's part of the whole Xinnan Corporation. It's not as well managed as video sharing. Such as YouTube. So there, especially there are certain ways because there is there are more and more people who are using VPN in China, and streaming is becoming a more viable method for pornography in a country where sexual content is very limited.
True, but then again, like it is, they even made a statement saying that they will like basically not only fine but imprison people who produce pornography in in China.
Sure.
But
Definitely.
I think what is interesting is that not only has mukbang become a thing, but like women basically live streaming their daily lives for people, and it's often people that have achieved some kind of wealth, right, and higher up in the social level.
my God! Don't check out some of those cosplaying subs.
Yeah, and I mean it gets
Oh, yeah.
progressively more sexualized, even though there's no real sexual content in it.
Subscribe
It's just
to
a
my
more
Patreon, silly voice. I
Oh,
have
God.
plenty of bikini pics for you.
But then again, like this ties into that even though it's a different market, it will be in an internet that is controlled by the Communist Party, right? With Xi Jinping's entire like WeChat internet, and like that.
Be
Even
careful what you say. Be careful what you're saying about our dear leader, brother.
I'm not criticizing Xi Jinping himself, of course.
WeChat is a good app.
It is a good app,
exactly.
Yeah.
But in any case, the human agency in controlling what goes on in these platforms becomes increasingly limited.
Yet
And
shithead
when-
humanists claim that is not so.
So can you explain how that, like, how would you justify that in this day and age, or in any day and age for that matter?
Justifying this aspect
Humanism, in the sense that like we are not just responsible, but like we are, how should I put it, in control of everything that goes on in the world. Our
I think we
values
have
matter, etc.,
an
etc.
expert on dismantling humanism and
Oh yeah.
with
Oh,
our
here he
dear,
goes.
Mongolian war god.
Here he goes.
Sorry,
I think
I had
that's a fair
to just
introduction.
accentuate
What's it say about his power level?
how evil I'm going to be against humanism, that post-humanists are inherently evil and scary people. So,
No, bro, come on.
Sorry.
Feel free to tear humanism a new asshole,
sorry,
brother.
I must bury
Feel
it
free.
Sorry,
under
Master,
the
I must go.
contradictions. So, a few points which are being made, at least specifically with regards to humanism, is it's always very interesting how humanism, especially nowadays, it likes to stress, it even takes the communist position on this, which is very surprising, that it is inherently against objectification of women, and that is a big critique that a lot of neoliberals have of pornography nowadays, is that it glorifies, those very, 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 how do you word this properly? Those curious situations where the pornography seems to be dressing or bordering on accounts of rape. And they also hold the paradoxical position that pornography is bad if it glorifies rape or if it objectifies women, but also by nature, they also hold that pornography is a way of expression, which is where we get into that very, very, very indistinct and mediated category of whether pornography is not only art, but to what degrees pornography is allowed. If neoliberals had their way, like Zizek said, they would have hardcore yet softcore porn at the same time, which is hard to fathom. But if you think of the differentiations and the opinions and positions they take upon it, it's not terribly difficult to imagine it. It's just hard to imagine it being functional and having the same appeal as modern pornography. So that's one characteristic of humanism that has come up within this conversation. But also another characteristic one could have of humanism within this particular instance is that we mentioned before that the inherent relation and nature of technology, it tends to separate a lot of the mediations and a lot of the distinctions and categories which exist there. And humanism in general is very, very, very exceptionally good at portraying a lot of events. So in this case, we could do the power dynamic, the archetypes, as Jericho mentioned them, of certain groups and certain power or positions within pornography. That's not inherently uncharacteristic of humanism to have that. Most people, when they conceive of humanism, they either conceive of secularized humanism, so modern humanism where, all we have to do is be peaceful and we have to be nice and democratic to one another, and then we'll all live a happy and great world. We'll all be culturally enriched.
A universal system.
Yes,
where
a universalized
there is a single
system.
culture, yet there are multiple cultures, pretends to be multiple cultures, while when you do a single culture, you eliminate all the multiple cultures. Right?
Yeah, that's actually a point I wanted to make later, but
Pretty easy to do with the aesthetic.
Yeah, with the
interaction that we
aesthetic
have now.
categories.
Well, I mean, sorry. Quick.
Yeah, let me just finish this real quick. I won't take too long, and then you guys can contribute whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
But like
it's more. I would just. It's more of like just like. So would you say this? The New Age aesthetics that happened in the early 1990s, right after the breaking down of Soviet. Would you consider that to be the high end, the high point of secular humanism? Then?
Yeah, I would actually say that. It's humanism and anti-humanism. It depends on what position you approach. I did a paper specifically about what post-humanism is compared to anti-humanism, and just a quick rundown on what anti-humanism is. Humanism in and of itself, it's usually and generally Eurocentric. It primarily relates to the perfection of the male body. So you could think of the statue of David by Michelangelo in Rome.
Vitruvian Man.
Yes, the Vitruvian Man as well. It's primarily focused on European notions of what Adamic perfection looked like. So you only have to think of how Adam is portrayed as being muscular and being very handsome. That is humanism, at least before anti-humanism. Anti-humanism arose in about the 1960s or so. You have people like Foucault, you have people like Deleuze, Derrida, Baudrillard. Those are anti-humanists where they critique humanism in how they treat technology, but how they treat one another. Within humanism, it's very hard to justify humanism before anti-humanism, in its earliest states. It's hard to justify humanism as well as justifying slavery and excluding certain categories and people from different forms of humanism and from being properly human. So anti-humanism is what we would see in the 1990s, where they want to use technology or they want to use society or a variety of cultures to better complete and integrate the human person, but they are also still committed to humanism, wherein they use technology or something else to complete the human person, but it's still a very idyllic and abstract ideal. You could even call humanism and anti-humanism specifically the proper category of how aesthetics is portrayed. I would say humanism is primarily aestheticized politics and aestheticized culture in and of itself. So if you get into humanism and a lot of the issues surrounding that, and also anti-humanism, which is the predominant form of humanism nowadays, the issue you primarily run into is not only an issue of how to portray people as being complex, because in neoliberalism and how it's portrayed not only in pornography, but in culture and certain characters, it's very hard to have a very well-rounded character and a very nuanced character. I mean, even within the movie industry or the culture industry, which we mentioned before, you have certain types of people. You have the school bully who actually turns out to be very sweet. You have the nerd who turns out, from being dorky into being the president of et cetera, et cetera. There's generally themes which are followed nowadays.
Subverting expectations.
Yes, exactly. So the issue within humanism, just to put it in a broad context right now, because I know I can go into the other points later, is that humanism is primarily reductive and it is an aesthetic categorization of what universality would look like, when in and of itself, universality is a very abstract idea. I know, as Teapot wants to put it in a few seconds, he wants to talk about fascist humanism. I would say that humanism in and of itself is the highest expression of what the most abstract notion of what fascist worldviews look like.
Oh yeah, and more specifically, because when it comes to aesthetics, I feel the people that had the, even though you said there are some progressive elements to the earlier fascism, when it came to Hitler's fascism and the more
Nazism,
the anti-degeneracy, National Socialism or whatever, the idea of abstract art not being art, but or some kind of beauty, some high ideal. I would say the way of them clinging on to this identity, of an ethnicity, and manufacturing this entire overarching narrative, this modernist humanism that they had, the aesthetization of these values from the Enlightenment era. Someone like Hannah Arendt that criticized both fascists and Marxists, for that matter, in the sense that they kind of, at least some parts of Marxism, or Marxists try to economize everything, right? And like this idea that you can put a number on everything. My point here is that like if you just take a look at the process of exterminating the Jews, it's very much like in a utilitarian sense to maximize the amount of deaths and like try to get away with it. They would inscribe literal numbers onto the Jews, and they would kind of ostracize them, like close them out of cafes, etc. It was a combination of the genius of Goebbels, like his apparatus of propaganda, and the symbolicism of it, their clothes that have been appropriated by even anti-fascists today. And like what I find the vital point in all of this, like that the fascist project wanted to do, was to, I think Zizek puts it better than anyone. Basically, Hitler as this figure, right, the authority, playing Pokemon Go, right? He would be the best Pokemon Go player ever, in the sense that you have this nothing, and then you have the subject with Kantian like experience of the world, this peak idealism that you find a lot in fascism, building up a subjective point of view that transcends everyone else. This would be, in at least Arendt's case, a mischaracterization of philosophies like Nietzsche or whatever, to kind of like supplant everyone else's worldview, the intersubjective worldview, with your own primal desires, like feels over reals kind of deal. And the best way to do that is through humanist numerization of everything.
Sorry, quick interjection here. I mean, one of the very interesting thing you could look about fascism, okay, is this widespread disgust of intelligentsia, yet a strange fascination, or perhaps better term, worship of industry, because what they want is an industrialized quantifiable science.
Yes.
They do not like the luminous, the unquantifiable, the sort of ever shifting aspect of it. Is that's something that's very easy to find.
Well, isn't the concept of consent sort of like emotional in the first place? Like one thing I like to throw out. This is a hot take question, like super hot take question. But if sex was not valuable to humans, would rape even be emotionally damaging?
Oh yeah, that was
like
the point.
What's the difference between being cuffed by a cop and losing your autonomy, and losing your autonomy in a rape, if not an emotional like question of expectation in a zeitgeist sense?
Well, I mean, that's the thing though, right? Like, can you really expect a human being to like fully rationalize their desires that have been brought about by millions and millions of years of evolution? And if you remove the emotions from it, then yeah, like maybe there isn't a problem. We have tried to like put ethics in it, morals on it, Kantian logic, some even, I guess there's some like Hegelian aspect to it too, of like recognition, like recognizing each other as consenting individuals, et cetera, But yeah, I don't think we can really determine what actually quantifies as consent, and putting a number on it isn't going to help that.
Yeah, like we try to rationalize the irrational, so to speak. Like we don't want to accept that the irrational might be correct at this point, so to speak. And Gil, you can go on in regards to that.
Well, sorry, Brigadeiro, you had something to say.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I'm about to lose all of my social credit points right here. I mean, all of them when anybody hears this. But I am going to go.
You're my promotion, buddy. So please do.
I am going to go completely to the wall.
Bananas.
So to preface this, before I say this, I am probably one of the few people On this, no, I am definitely the only person on the server who have read every single fascist author in existence.
Why?
Every single one in existence. Even the obscure ones, not just Ebola.
Even
But I've
Hitler's
gone-
esotericism.
Yes, I have read Hitler's Priest. That was a very interesting work anyway, so...
Which way,
Wait,
Western
what
man?
about James Mason? You have to have read James.
Of course I read James Mason. I mean, why wouldn't I have?
He's a
I've read
countryman.
George Lincoln Rockwell as well, my friend. I mean, he's a complete moron, but, you know...
You're a professional.
Oh yeah, I have to take this professionally, unfortunately.
Wait, before you go on, I just want to know, how many brain tumor exorcism did you have to go through after reading some of these?
Well, I can read people I don't agree with very well and not feel completely emotionally distraught like I want to kill myself, so I would say only a few times. And it depends really on who I read. You know, there's some of them that aren't completely intellectually dishonest, but somebody like Rockwell I don't know how in the world anybody would have found him charismatic. But anyway, going back to what I was going to say, the phenomenon we're talking of humanism nowadays, especially the instrumentalization not only of people, but as AngryTeapot mentioned it, as the numerization, if you will, of individuals, that's just a consequence of how the West had to adapt to the total war model of Germany. I mean, you know, when Joseph Goebbels said, you know, ich frage euch, wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Wollt ihr ihn, wenn nötig, totaler und radikaler, als wir ihn uns heute überhaupt erst wo stellen können? Nun Volk, steh auf und Sturm bricht los. You know, when he said, do you want total war? You know, can you imagine an instance where everything is completely put on the line, if you will? The West had to adapt to that, because if the West stayed complacent within how they were structured at the moment, they couldn't have won. You know, obviously, the Soviet Union had total war different from the U.S. did, but if you look at how the U.S. adapted to it, they had to use total war, and they had to speed up the entire process of how they treated nature. The atomic bomb is an instance of the total war being applied, even though America didn't have to utilize all of its manpower, all of its resources to fuel a war machine. Deleuze mentions that every state is inherently a war machine now. And so that is the preface and the reason humanism now acts the way it does, and why fascists are, you know, very, very conceivably reasonable in certain instances. You know, people like Linkola. When you read Linkola and you have the ecological crisis facing you, that seems completely feasible, because there has been an instrumentalization of how humanism was treated in that regard, where the abstract ideal of every person having an inherent worth, especially within how the UN has formulated it with the human rights dogma or constitution of it, there's no sort of backing whatsoever to it. Without having any sort of backing or having any sort of force or total war phenomena to back those claims, humanism, especially neoliberal humanism, has fallen flat. That is why in this particular instance is paradoxical, because neoliberalism says that it is all for culture being integrated, but every particular instance of culture being quote-unquote authentically integrated, for instance, how Islam was used in Chechnya, you know, how Chechnya and Islam is so inherent within it. How did Russia respond? You know, obviously they're illiberal now, but at the time, they were a quote-unquote neoliberal democracy. They tried to universalize and impose Russian norms and Russian culture upon them while keeping the Chechen model there to some degree. So that is a total war phenomenon. So the particular instance within humanism is not so much that it utilizes the total war mindset, because that is just the postmodern condition. That is the world we live in. We cannot imagine a world where there's not only instrumentalization of something, but there is an inherent speed within it. A book I used for that paper I mentioned before, Paul Virilio, Speed in Politics, he argues most cogently that nowadays dramology, or the science of speed, is what governs governance. You know, at this point, not only does neoliberalism treat that there is no other game within the ballpark, which, you know, obviously is a completely separate matter for another day, but with how neoliberalism is a cult and fetishization of progress, it claims to, you know, have made travel more fast, to make it more safe, you could cover distances at any rate and any quicker. You know, we're within the total war mentality and the war mongering mentality. And so the issue within humanism in this specific context is that it is it is hypocritical. It cannot transcend the reality that as much as it may like to moralize and be re-sentimental for a better time when morality was, governed by the dictates of reason, not by force with reason, we're not living within that.
Of course.
Well, yeah, of course. Like, I think the total war mentality can also be summed up in like the kind of the ends justify the means, but in the fascist sense, it's more. I think it was Franco that said it in Spain: "Victory or death." And it's still a kind of a slogan in neo-nationalists, even in my own country, they use that. And this kind of the ends justify the means.
Traitors, the lot of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, whatever you have to say about Kant, I think one thing he used well was the categorical imperative, and that basically the logical conclusion of it, which the logic is essentially the same as Jesus Christ: do unto others like you want to be treated, or it's rather do or act in accordance to what you would wish to be universal law. And so that has a very like universalist mindset. But one of the main ethical consequences of this is not using people as a means to an end, and using men as mere cannon fodder, or using women as like some kind of production unit is beyond that. That is not traditionally that would be unethical, right? But this total war mindset goes beyond that. I mean, we're in a current age where people are talking seriously about total nuclear annihilation, or what is it? Nuts nuclear utilization target selection, where you can literally blow up North Korea to prevent the whole world from exploding. The entirety of this is absurd, and it only fits within like the neoliberal, like humanist agenda that still kind of clings on. The only people that really criticize it is not Sam Harris. It's not any of these like centrist enlightened types. It's like Slavoj Žižek. He talks about it in his latest book, Like a Thief in Broad Daylight. And this absurdity can, I think, be not only most perfectly expressed in like the extremities of pornography, like using people as mere objects and trying to kind of produce a surplus enjoyment that people consume, but also in the culture industry in general. I'll go deeper into that later, especially about like South Korea, like the horrible industry of K-pop and so on. But I think Brig wanted to say something about Hong Kong. Unless Maestro...
I do want to say a few things about Hong Kong. If you look at the undisclosed day in 1989, but also what's going on in Hong Kong now, these protesters are completely and fully aware that they cannot have democracy if they're not willing to sacrifice it. And so neoliberalism lives within a delusion at this point if it believes that democracy can be attained universally without violence, without total war mentality. And so obviously the most ready character one can bring up is America. How America exports, you could even call it Trotskyist to a certain degree. It exports revolution to other countries and tries to install neoliberal governments in not only cultural climates, but social and political environments where democracy would completely flat out fail without any sort of U.S. support, which is what we've seen throughout history, and especially after the 1970s and after the 1980s when there was a reversal wave. But I just wanted to specifically preface that, at least when you mentioned Kant, really no other ethicist in history had utilized the same mentality with Kant, which Kant had. And it's properly called transcendental insofar as it cannot be feasibly rooted within the reality of how interactions work, which is why people like Hegel, but obviously Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, but most specifically Hegel dismantles Kant from within his own framework, where there's such complexity within how human relations are supposed to be flattened out and universalized to certain actions that, effectively within Hegel, the state is the best arbiter of what the moral decision is at most times, because not only does that take account of the universal condition, at least insofar as it exists among people at the time, but because it's very hard to keep morality as a constant and stable entity throughout history. And most people now, even when they utilize Kant, there's always something in the back of their mind, especially within most Kant authors nowadays, that preface something of yeah, I believe this is a good social category, but as of myself, I don't apply the categorical imperative, which is what it was supposed to be. It's an instantiation. So another comment I want to make really, really quick before Geo and Jericho begin to speak is that humanism nowadays, or at least neoliberalism, it tries to utilize a lot of the same themes which both communism and fascism had, or as I call them, either the modernist politics or the eschatological politics. Is that neoliberalism, especially in the 1990s when HK asked me about the quote-unquote high point of secular humanism, it tries to take over the same eschatological mentality which both of them had of being the final end of history, as being the final ideology, where it became not a question or debate of whether there could be any upsets to neoliberalism, but to what degree it could be and to what sort of, collectivization or privatization, if you will, of the economy could exist. And so the particular issue within humanism and how it'll face nowadays is that particularly humanism, as of now, tries to live a completely schizophrenic political environment while it acts as though it is not schizophrenic, which if you know anything about Deleuze, or even you could use somebody like Brigadeiro, trying to live a life of lines of flight while trying to be stratified completely dismantles your own war machine. And inevitably what will happen with humanism is that it will collapse. And the most likely phenomena is it won't be socialism or barbarism. It will be socialism and barbarism.
Yes.
True.
And
God bless.
Yeah.
God bless America. The thing about Kant and like the imperative that you mentioned before, I have read him a little bit. Maybe Brig is gonna stop me and beat me up for it, but like I don't think equating the categorical imperative with the golden rule is entirely adequate. But beyond that, I think people kind of underestimate, especially with like the Chinese model right now, people underestimate Western democracy and the like liberal type of organization of labor a little bit. They think of it as kind of, well, it's already over, right? The Chinese model is capitalism of the future. And maybe.
Are you saying it's not, brother?
I'm saying it's.
You're gonna need every
possibly
point of social
not.
credit.
Not only am I going to have to beat you up, but I'm also going to have to take away all your social credit points. You're going to have a bad day here pretty soon.
All right, bro.
Hey, Brig, that's my job, okay?
I'll be the enforcer. You be the brains behind it. All right.
Exactly.
Deal.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
another, persona which shits on humanism and on many aspects in regards to that, and in regards also to the relationship to technology, then it's Kaczynski, and we have a local expert on Kaczynski.
Oh boy.
Oh no.
Jericho, come forth, brother.
Come.
So I want to preface this by saying that I don't agree with Kaczynski on everything, but I do think that he has some important points on the whole overarching theme that seems to be going on today, which is consent. And what I have to say about like the concept of society itself and where it boils down into consent is with technology and the needs of the many being the tyrant to that of the few. So, for instance, let's say that, you're Ted Kaczynski and you fucking hate cars. They just piss you off. You don't like the fact that cars exist. It's not really up to you in the neoliberal sense of, oh, well, just don't buy a car. Because as the majority begins to structure themselves around the existence of cars with highways and further away workplaces and bigger roads and even something more specified as like a cell phone, you get into this point where you no longer have the ability to consent to which products constitute a need. A car is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity for participating in society, and it's required of you as a human being to operate one. Same with a cell phone, along with all the bad things that come with cell phones, like being tracked, being advertised to you, being sucked into the world of the cellular phone constantly.
Mm-hmm.
These things are now just side effects of your survival. And I think survival is just like inherently not consensual. And maybe the concept of consent itself might be a little overblown, because at the end of the day, no one really asked to be here. No one asked to be born. Nobody asked to like put up with the responsibility of being human. I mean, you don't consent to eating. You don't consent to breathing. These are just things that don't bother you because your lizard brain, has gaslit you into not giving a shit. But technology isn't in our code, and I think it's starting to break apart the ideal image of consent to what I'm describing here, which is that nothing is really consensual. Consent is an ideal that we try to apply our experiences to. And I think that's a bit of a problem because I wanted to say earlier, and we got a little bit away from it, but I think rape is less of a heinous crime and more of a miscommunication. And I think it's only in its ideal form, only in its moral form is it a heinous act. I'm also going to preface this by saying I'm technically a survivor, so I get a pass. Fuck you.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Jericho, after this, you are to immediately report to your local operator for a psychological evaluation.
Not again.
This is mandatory. You don't want us to bring out the chair, do you?
I mean, Brig, did you want to say something? God of War.
Brigadeiro.
Yes, I didn't want to say something. I always want to say something, but
That's great.
I cannot. Okay, so Jericho, what it seems like you're doing is you're taking the anarch pill, if you will, the Ernst Junger pill, as I always like to call it, because you talk about especially manufacturing consent, and I would say that it's very hard to draw a line throughout history of consent not being manufactured to some degree. And Chomsky cynically makes the point, but I think he's still too idealistic in how he tries to conceive it at the end that, society inherently conditions you and it artificially manufactures your consent. And realistically, in how he tries to portray it, he wants a society in which that won't happen. And I would say by and large, society is meant to have some form of non-manufactured consent. And you could get into nuances of this person's not qualified enough to understand, so, they don't get a proper say in the matter, so on and so forth. And so what it sounds like you're advocating to me, and I don't know whether this is true because I don't know if you've read Humanism by Ernst Junger, but really what he says is that you have to kind of bear through the fact that not only is society going to manufacture consent, but it will do virtually everything in its power to stop you from actualizing any sort of dreams or goals or intentions that you have. And thus, he advocates for becoming an anarch, which is not to be confused with an anarchist, because Ernst Junger says that anarchists are by and large childish and idealistic in how they conceive of social interaction functioning, but also how they conceive of a post-social environment acting. Effectively, what he
And there goes our anarchist audience. Thank you very much.
If I can clarify real quick, just before we get away from it, what I'm boiling down to is less a matter of how I think society is run. Because if I'm honest, I think I'm a little smarter than that. I think I'm smart enough to recognize that I am too stupid to direct how society should be run, and so I don't like to talk about what I would do as a society. Like, I wouldn't consider myself an anarch or an anarchist. I just like to question the concept of consent as the ideal, because I would prefer that people see things as clearly as possible. So I would say that I'm more of a passive observer, and I'm not advocating for anything.
Okay, yeah, I'd say that's completely fair enough. And HK, if our anarchist embodiment, or if our watchers are not mature enough to take at least some form of criticism, I don't think they're on the right podcast, to be honest. Anyway, that's not the point of what I was trying to say. And so, with how Jung tries to construe an anarch, not only is the anarch inherently able to bear a lot of the contradictions within society and how it governs itself, but it's very, very similar to Stirner. I would say, in fact, it's a better exposition upon Stirner than Stirner tends to do in his own commentary in response to the ego on its own. Because how he construes the anarch is that the anarch is, by and large, completely separated from the social mores of society. He participates within the social mores of society, and he takes on a variety of opinions and looks and gestures and actions in order to clothe himself in it, but he feels no obligation whatsoever, not only to uphold the social mores, but he also finds them to be, a certain degree, to be very, very condemning and very, very restrictive and oppressive upon his potential. So the anarch, where it differs from Stirner, and obviously we can talk about this in greater depth, but where it differs particularly from Stirner's ego is that the anarch is not reliant upon immediacy of actions. The anarch doesn't take, action in the first instance of, oh, well, we can construe society as being this or that, and so I can act as I will. A lot of Stirner, people that write Stirnerites, if you will, or egoists, they misconceive how Stirner treats of it and thinks that you can just act willy-nilly and do whatever you want because your ego wills it. And frankly, that's not very conducive to what the egoist mentality is, where you don't think of consequences, because to some degree you factor in the consequences and inherence within how you treat and act in the point.
Actually, isn't that the same with like hedonism? How like people construe hedonism as being like, just seek pleasure and fuck the consequences. Like it's a sort of it's a sort of a caricature of what it actually is.
Yeah, like the Epicureans differ from hedonists in general, because Epicurus doesn't think you should just jump on any sort of pleasure to begin with. He expects simple pleasures which can help refine the soul and the understanding and the pursuit of pleasure. I would say Jung would be to hedonism what Epicurus was, where he expounds upon what Stirner does, but he doesn't make it so that it's very, very limiting and very, very self-tautological or dogmatic in nature. The anarch is supposed to be almost like a nomad. It's supposed to be the nomadology of Deleuze applied in a personal context. You're not limited by social mores. You're not limited by what the state has. In fact, you may participate and go along with dictatorships in particular instances because that benefits your end goal and the collapse that is envisioned. And it's supposed to be a personal and social building up of the conditions where you can just simply slip away from society and there will be no consequences. Nobody will come after you, et cetera, et cetera. It's like what Kaczynski imagines the ideal rural lifestyle would be like. But you don't have to do it in contradistinction to the social apparatus, because by that point, the social apparatus will have been so degenerated by your actions that it no longer has any sort of bearing upon you. So you can basically become a nomad. That's what an anarch is. And I pose this and I bring this up with the understanding that in how you treat humanism, you also have to treat yourself within that lens, because humanism likes to immerse you within, society conditions you to such a large degree that it makes individualism very hard. But you can express yourself in this individualism by how you consume, how you think, how you act. And one of the most important things, I would say, within a post-humanist framework or a post-humanist mentality is that you have to have that anarch idea.
Cut the power lines, right?
So basically what you're saying is
I'm going
delete the power grid's credit score.
Delete the power grid and delete the power grid within yourself.
Listen. Whatever power grid you guys delete, it better not be Beijing's, because
okay.
I don't want to have to expound on you the consequences.
Very sorry, Mr. Federal Agent.
That's it. That's it. We're going down.
That's it.
See, this is what we need to end with. We started out with goofy, and then we had a lot of serious conversation, even though we talked about pornography, which is very hard to be serious about. And then now we're going back to the racism. We start with racism and we end with racism.
Regarding
what was will be, Brick. What was will be.
The white eyes regarding Beijing and the power grids, there is a more, how should I put it, deeper power grid, their own internet. And what goes on there is, I would say, the expression of the pure, hopeless, like hedonist reproduction, forced, how should I put it, participation in this social experiment we called social media, like entrepreneurship or whatever. Like if you are a woman and you want to become a streamer and you want to have some kind of a parasocial relationship with an audience and kind of self-commodify yourself, the best way to do that is to take all this experimental technology, usually developed in either pre-war circumstances where you want to identify subjects through like mass surveillance CCTV cameras, otherwise known as deep fakes, probably used by, I don't know, like the Chinese government, or trying to identify all the facial characteristics to have like a physical footprint on every single person, which is just a continuation of this like numerization of people and individuals. And these people that utilize this deep fake technology are the people that rack in the most viewers. And how they do it is, I would say, just taking the hyperreal phenomenon to its extreme. They're taking characteristics of the feminine, right? Thin shin, like very bright pale skin, and some kind of a pale complexion, and big eyes, etc., etc. The computer programs it and changes the faces to fit this feminine characteristic to trigger a positive reaction from the male audience and to get them hooked on it. And this happened to some streamer, huge scandal. Of course, she got like removed or whatever, but she got away with it. That was the main point. And the thing is like you're basically forced into doing this if you want to compete on the market. And I mean, that's an extreme version of it, right? But like to kind of conclude on like my points of how this commodification, like how horrible it really can be. You don't need to look at like a dystopia like China, like as it is right now in the worst parts. But if you look at a literal neoliberal area, like that is literally a democracy, look at South Korea and look at the culture industry as a whole, and specifically on K-pop, right? I think there's been 3 instances the last week or so of K-pop singers killing themselves. And they've been, you can watch some cuck philosophy video on it if you really want to get into it. But
yeah, they're treated pretty poorly.
It's not, they're not just treated very poorly, they're not treated at all as if they're like subjects, and they're not even allowed to kill themselves. In fact, one of them were basically prohibited. Like they found her while doing it, and then she managed to do it anyways. And I mean, God, there was some rap artist that died later today too. In the United States, you die from drug overdoses. In South Korea, you die from suicidal tendencies, right? I think there's the line, forget about the 27th group. We ain't making it past 21, right? And so these self-destructive lifestyles that are just the deadlock of hedonist reproduction, if you combine this mindset with the developments of technology, like forget about Oscar Wilde, forget about 1984. Like reality is truly like stranger and more horrifying than anything even H.P. Lovecraft could conceive of when he coined the term cosmicism, right? This new technology rips away the very idea of human agency, and there is nothing we can do about it. So yeah, I got everyone suicidally depressed.
There is one thing you can do.
Nothing changed.
There's one thing you can do. What? Instead of crying and feeling upset about that, you could just do what Marinetti said, where you could say the beauty of speed, the beauty of violence, the beauty
of what?
The beauty of speed, the beauty of violence, and the beauty of death.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry. I have a far better, solution to all of this than what Brick said, and that is subscribe to this podcast. Give us your fucking money.
AndGeo
give us your money so we can do what I just said.
Exactly.
Geo,
yes, thank you, Maestro.
Us, please.
Well, I'm afraid I can't uplift you. However, However, maybe what can uplift you is the Leftyband store, where you can buy some real cool socks and mugs and other cool Leftyband
assorted
merchandise.
Garments.
Right. The podcast also wanted, like, you guys also want to talk about the culture industry, and I think this is where Teapot is guiding us towards with K-pop. And I'm afraid it's kind of late here. I'm not going to be participating in that part. However, I want to leave with 2 points. First of all, I read this really cool quote today. I don't think it was on this server, right? But about how this was about like video game development, and that our world is like our universe is built on games and war, and that all games are competitive to some extent. And I thought this was very much like, this sounded a lot like what Brig was talking about before, about like the total war mentality or unrestricted warfare, perhaps. That is my first point, just a nice quote. And the other point I wanted to make before I leave is that, like, techno-capital, bro, it's using the proletarians' desires to abolish it. And I will not say anything further about that. Thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye, AndGeo. It was nice having
Good
you.
night.
HH.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. That's right. Yep.
Yes.
That's right.
Now we're cancelled, bro. Now you did it.
We did it.
We did it.
So to save us, gentlemen,
That's the
remember
point.
to subscribe to our SoundCloud, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to go and buy some shitty merch from Redbubble, which is high quality shitty merch.
And also, when our Patreon is up, please give us all of your disposable income, you know.
We are the new e-horse. Please love us.
From e-girls to e-boys, we have been commodified and such
To e-pods, you know.
to e-pods, which we shall now succumb to our incumbent coma. And I hope we have not put you, our audience, to this coma as well. Any final points before we round off
Well,
from anyone?
this from my part, we will continue exploring the topic of humanism, and we will keep on this line of the culture industry as this kind of stepping stone towards exploring various topics in regards to aspects of current society. And we are gonna have other guests, probably, who knows. Our big goals are always to end up with Sasha Grey and Slavoj Zizek in the same podcast, you know, for
On the same bed, you mean.
exactly. And
Hell yes.
all right, what else can I say? That enjoy your schizophrenia, boys. Live into his depression and go with the flow.
And you know what you could always do? You could always be like Terence McKenna, not become an acid communist, but that's basically what he was. You said earlier, Jericho, that you could kind of, how should I put it, not have any values, right? Criticize everything. And that's basically his point. His point was that fashion is dumb, humanism is dumb, enjoy jazz, do experimental music or dances, and explore.
And then commit suicide
Yeah,
at the
like-
age of 45.
If you could choose between killing yourself or having a coffee or having sex, at least consider doing some drugs first, and maybe you can experience the truly schizophrenic nature of our universe, let alone capitalism. But I don't think we have anything to lose but our sanity. Schizoids of the world unite. That will be my final.
Oh,
Yeah. My fucking final word is similar to that. A lot of people say that if you make bad decisions, you'll reap the whirlwind. I say you fucking ride it. The whole fucking world is about having interesting experiences, not having long lives. So even if it is a death trap and it sucks ass, do something cool.
See, I'm glad we're all in agreement on this, because my final comment is, if you're an anarch, you've got to ride the tiger, my friend. You have to ride the tiger. better than anybody else in history that's ridden the tiger. Yeah, if somebody's being instrumentalized in a fascist humanist mentality, go along with it. See what it's like. Go along for the ride. You have to have those interesting experiences, like Jericho said. We're not here on this earth forever, my friend. So the time you are here on this earth, at least make it not only interesting, but contribute something meaningful, even if that meaningfulness is you becoming the second Joseph Mengele for some odd reason.
And my last point is none of the things that the previous podcast member says matters, because within 20 years all of you will be racking up social credit points, for our glorious new Neo-China.
Unless we destroy it first, brother.
Please delete your browser histories immediately after listening to this podcast.
You know what?
We
Fuck it.
need you
Destroy
in
all of your
Neo-China.
technology. It's all downhill from
Live in
here
the
on.
woods. That's something interesting you can do.
Wood gang.
Wood gang. Okay, I think we've finally lost our sanity. This has been all for the Pseud Central second episode. HH, peace out.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. HH. Ooh, ooh, ah, ah.
And have a good night, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, or whatever the fuck is your time period is.
And we wish everyone a happy Hanukkah.